when they make these extended introductions, so I had no idea I had done some of that. Oh, there it is. I am sitting in a stool, and I'm not wearing socks. Now, this is not a fashion statement because I don't know anything about fashion. My wife buys all my clothes, but I have been diagnosed with very, very severe neuropathy in my feet due to chemo, and so I have to, it helps me to find shoes that fit lightly around my feet, and if I wear socks, it puts pressure on my feet, so you get my ankles. So if you don't like it, you can always leave. You didn't pay for this much anyway, so I'm honored to be here. I have tremendous love and respect for my dear brother Sam and his wife Amy. It was a treasure to have them in our graduate program for 3 years, and they're just an amazing couple. They're just unusual in good and bad ways, but mostly good, I would say. And Sam, thank you so much for what you shared with us. I want to continue our theme about truth and what has happened in the culture so that we can be more effective in our discipling our children and our grandchildren and ourselves, and learning to speak out with bold confidence without having to be angry to the culture that we live in. We live in the first time, to my knowledge, in human history, where the religion of Jesus is no longer widely taught to be superstitious, as one atheist put it. To believe that Jesus rose from the dead is like believing in a flying spaghetti monster. It is a fairy tale for people who just aren't educated. But we live in a day now where the religion of Jesus is, for the first time since maybe the 1st or 2nd century, considered to be immoral. For the longest time, even people who thought Christianity was not a reasonable thing to believe still thought that the teachings of Jesus represented a pattern for moral theory and the way people ought to live, believers or non-believers. He was considered to be a moral giant in history. This is being denied now because Jesus and the Christian religion are now considered to be a white male religion that has been foisted on people of color and women in a very, very power and negative type of way. Christianity is intolerant and bigoted, and is, as a result of that, a force in culture for great harm and great evil. And there's no doubt that people in the name of Jesus have done things that I'm not proud of, but I'm not talking about versions of Christianity that are clearly not a part of biblical teaching. I'm talking about those parts of the scriptures that are understood properly. And those are considered to be bigoted and intolerant and harmful. So this is a new day that we live in, and it's a time when standard preaching and standard ways that we raise our kids in homeschooling and in Christian schools are just not going to do the job. We are losing our kids when they go to college. The navigators say something like 83% who identify as Christians when they go to college do no longer identify as Christians when they get out of college. Now, that people think that we are ignorant and bigoted was expressed recently by a well-known novelist, Jane Smiley, when she said, here is how their ignorance, that's Bible-believing Christians, their ignorance and bigotry work. First, they put the fear of God into you. If you don't believe in the literal word of the Bible, you'll burn in hell. Of course, the literal word of the Bible is tremendously contradictory. And so you must abdicate all critical thinking. So now there's a tension that's placed in our kids that are growing up. You either pursue a life where you engage in critical thinking and learn how to think well, in which case you have to give up the Christian thing, or you suppress your intellectual curiosity and deny the need to think about things in a curious and learning kind of way, and you hold on to your Christianity by a blind faith. And those are your choices. You think that's a good set of choices for our young people to face? You like those? Well, that's why a Barna study indicated about several years ago, 7, 8 years ago, that we are losing our young people in a record number once they get out of high school and college. There is an exponential number that are not only abandoning the church, but belief in God and Christianity, and they're becoming nuns. They don't have any particular religious view, and many of them have become agnostic and atheist. I was called on the phone several summers ago by somebody I had never talked to. I didn't know who this person was. I picked up the phone, and he said, Dr. Moreland, I and a friend of mine are working in this large church here in Southern California, and our primary ministry for about 8 to 10 years has been working with people that are atheists that are willing to have conversations about Christianity, or believers that are losing their faith. And we have a group of 30, and there are about 8 to 10 of them that are going to give up. In 2 weeks, they've decided if something doesn't happen, they're getting out of this thing. And would you come over and just hold a Q&A with them? Well, I considered it an incredible privilege. So I went over there and spent 2 hours with this huge group of about 30 people in a circle. And I just spent time answering questions for a good 2 hours, anything they wanted to ask. And after it was over with, I had person after person after person, this is no kidding, come up to me and say, I'm in, I'm keeping my faith. I did not know that there were people who actually had answers to these questions. I had no idea. Why didn't they have any idea? Because one of the reasons Barna found that people leave the church is that the church is not a safe place to ask questions. If you ask questions, people will look down on you like, what's wrong with you? You're supposed to just have faith. So it's not safe to ask questions. And secondly, if you do ask a question, you don't get a good answer, because it is not a value in our evangelical culture to love God with the mind. In fact, if I were to ask you, what does it mean to love God with your heart? I think you'd have some idea. If I asked you, what does it mean to love God with your will? I suspect that you would talk about being obedient and trying to work on your choices so that they conform to what Jesus taught us. If I said to you, what does it mean to love God with your mind? Would you have any idea what that means? Would you have any clue as to how to go about that? Why not? Are you teaching your kids to love God with their minds? Now, I'm not trying to shame you. Shame is profoundly unhelpful. There's nobody here but us chickens, and I'm just having a heart-to-heart talk. I mean, I flew all the way here from the idiots that live in Southern California, and thank God I'm breathing some fresh air. But then my colleague Dave Horner shows up, and I can't ever get rid of him. So, the point is that we are in a culture that Sam incredibly well described. That is the result of us. The reason that culture is the way it is because of the way we have become. I'm just being honest. And that's why Jane Smiley would say something like, you have to abdicate all critical thinking to be a Christian and accept a simple system of belief that you're not allowed to question. So there'll be no Q&A tonight. A corollary to this point is they make sure that you understand that the devil resides in the toils and snares of complex thought, so it's best not to think at all. So we live in a time when there is a tremendous disregard and disrespect in the general culture for people who claim to believe in historic Christianity, because the religion is just an expression of blind faith and emotion, and a Bible that they have no reason, they have no clue as to why they believe this thing as opposed to any other book. And they tell me to just trust, believe in Jesus, and you'll feel his presence and your life will change. Well, heck, that's exactly what the Mormons do. I mean, you feel a burning in your bosom when you read the Quran. It's not the Quran, the Book of Mormon, and you will know in your knower that this is God's revelation. I am not against that. I'm going to lay some things out for your training here, but our knowledge of Christianity's truth is based on a lot more than simply that, though it does include those points. So now that you're disgustingly discouraged, but sometimes facing reality is not comfortable. It's no more comfortable for me than it is for you. So what I want to do is explain the general context. Sam already launched into this as to what's going on. And then I'm going to give you a little bit of equipping. I want to try to identify for you what are the three issues that we're facing as a people. And then give you a little bit of training on some things that you can use with your kids and grandkids, and that will be helpful to you. So now, how did we get into this mess? I'm not going to tell you the history of how we got here. I'll just tell you where we're at. Right now, we're in the midst of a three-way worldview struggle. A worldview, as you know, is basically just a set of the things that you believe to be true that influences how you see the world. So Marxism is a worldview, Christianity is a worldview, LGBTQ approaches to reality express a worldview. So a worldview is the sum total of what you believe about life's most important issues. And the three worldviews are scientific naturalism and postmodern relativism, as Sam expressed it, and then happily, what I'm going to call ethical monotheism, which is the idea that there's a personal God who is the source of our moral value and our creator. That would include conservative Jews and others, but the most powerful expression of ethical monotheism is evangelical Christianity. So I will use it synonymously with evangelicalism from now on, just for convenience sake. And scientific naturalism is the dominant view since the Scopes trial in 1926, I believe it was. It took from 26 up until 1960-ish for this worldview, which began in the early decades of the 20th century, to flower and become the accepted view of reality. And the view has a commitment to what's real and the commitment to how we know reality. So the commitment to what's real is that the physical world is all there is, was, or ever will be. So the only thing that exists is the universe, and everything in the universe is entirely physical. Everything is a collection of particles that stand together in fields of forces and obey the laws of nature. So there's no free will because you are completely determined, or the chances of you acting are fixed by the laws of physics and chemistry. And so you're literally not responsible for anything you do. But by the way, this is one of the reasons why justice has slowly changed from being retributive justice, where the goal is for a person to be paid back for the evil that they've done, they're guilty, to therapeutic justice, where the focus of justice is to take the side of the criminal and to find ways to use the judicial system to bring healing to them and help. Now, I don't think it has to be an either or, but I think that once we get rid of people being responsible for their actions and having to take responsibility, we're in trouble. But you have no alternative if the universe is all there is and everything within the universe is physical. I debated an atheist, Eddie Tabash, who's an ACLU lawyer and this knucklehead, and he basically said the universe is all there is, and it's a closed system of cause and effect, so that whatever happens in the universe is the result of something else happening and a connection by the law of nature. And so the laws of nature govern everything. And I said to him, well, how do you find people guilty or innocent in court? You're a lawyer. If everything they did is the result of their genetic structure and whatever environmental inputs happened to them, how do you find them guilty? And he said, well, yeah, he changed the subject. Anyway, he really did. It's on YouTube. So I'm not lying. You can check me out here. Okay, but so that's natural. The way that we know, how do we know reality? The methods of the hard sciences. If you want to know something's real, if you want to know it, and if you want to know the truth about reality, there's one way that is a guarantee to give you truth. And that's the time-tested methods in physics, chemistry, neuroscience, biology, and the hard sciences. If something has been tested and passed in one of those hard sciences, then we know it's true. But everything else, the humanities, ethical theory, religion, for heaven's sakes, is not something that gives you knowledge about anything. Nobody knows who's right, one way or the other. So there are no experts in religion because there's nobody who knows anything is right. I was in a little meeting in Baltimore years ago with a couple of professors at Johns Hopkins, invited some of their professorial and other friends to this gathering where I was going to share the gospel in their home. And one person said that they were bringing their boss, who had a PhD in physics from Johns Hopkins and had been an engineer 30 years, and he just hated Christianity. And he just loved taking shots at Christians, so he was going to bring him to this gathering. And I said, well, thanks a lot. So at the beginning, I see him come in the door. We're at the hors d'oeuvre table before the meeting starts. They make a beeline over to me, and after pleasantries, this gentleman says to me, "So I understand you're a philosopher and a theologian." I said, well, I give it my best shot. And he said, yeah. He said, I used to be interested in that stuff myself. when I was a teenager. But when I matured intellectually, I began to realize that if you can't quantify your data and test it with your senses in the laboratory, it's nothing but hot air and idle speculation. Whoa, interesting way to meet somebody. So that is an expression of this view of knowledge. Knowledge is limited within the bounds of the senses, or what can be immediately inferred. We've never been able to see a magnetic field. You can't see, touch, taste, or hear one, but you from observing iron filings and so on, you could pretty much quickly infer that there must be something out there like a field that's causing these things. Okay, but generally speaking, if you ever had somebody say, well, you can't prove that scientifically when you're witnessing? Ever had somebody say that? Ever said something, well, if I can't see it, I can't believe in it? Those are expressions of this worldview, and it dominates the universities. It dominates the media. The media is, study after study has shown that our media are overwhelmingly advocates of scientific naturalism. Now, the third worldview is one that Sam has talked about, postmodern relativism, and it's basically the idea that there is no such thing as objective reality. There is no real world. That's why there's no such thing as gender or sexuality. That's complete social construction. So you can have as many pronouns as you want because there's no fact of the matter. There's no right or wrong answer to the question, what's my gender or biology? That's an outdated modernist notion. We live in postmodern times, and there is no reality. Reality is a social creation. There is no objective truth. Truth is relative to your community, and what your community regards as true is true for them, and what another community regards as true is true for them. And there's no ultimate truth, or there's nobody right or wrong. They're just right or wrong in their community. So you can't judge another community. There's on it goes, but there's no truth for everybody. That's why Christianity is so stinking bigoted. People have the gall to claim that their truth is true for everybody. And that's just outright immoral, and that's bigotry. Who in their right mind would foist their views on other people like that? That religion is immoral, and it's intolerant, and all the rest of it. So now, what this surfaces for us is three quick questions. But let me just give a quick statement about these two views. And there's a lot I could say about this. But first of all, this kind of scientism, that science is the only way to know truth and so on, is self-refuting. And something is self-refuting, like the statement, no sentence of English is longer than 3 words, because that statement itself falsifies its own assertion. Like if I said I can't speak a word of English, that statement itself is a word of English, and it makes my claim false. You understand? So it's self-refuting. And the statement that the only thing that you can know and that to be true are things that can be quantified and tested in the science lab is something that no one could know to be true because it cannot itself be tested in a science lab. Do you understand how that works? So you always want to be on the lookout for self-refutation. So if you're talking to somebody, just see if you apply their view to them. Does their view pass their own standards of what's reasonable? And a lot of times you'll find it doesn't. That's a good little technique to use in reasoning. So I said to this gentleman at the dinner party after he went on for a couple of minutes, I said, sir, please forgive me. I'm having a little bit of difficulty with something. I have to ask you. I said, you're claiming the only thing we can know to be true is what can be tested in the lab. He said, yeah, that's right. And I said, okay, well, in the last 2 minutes or so, you've uttered maybe 30 assertions. You've made a number of claims. I'm going to say around 30. And I said, I can't think of a single one that could satisfy your standard. I mean, I can't think of a single thing you've said that could be quantified and tested in the lab. And if I'm wrong, please point out what statement you made that is verifiable in the science lab. But you see my tension. Since none of your own statements even satisfy your criterion for being known, then by your own standards, what you've been doing for the last 2 or 3 minutes, sir, is spouting hot air and idle opinion. I'm just quoting your own standards back to you now. And it was a really uncomfortable moment for the dear man. Now, a postmodern relativism, the way to solve this problem is to find something that the postmodern relativist is fully committed to. Treat it as though it's relative and see what they do. You'll get an absolutist come out of the closet immediately. So years ago, I was at a Stop and Go or a 7-Eleven, I can't remember. Long line, we're standing there, and the guy next to me and I got in a conversation. And before you know it, it turned to ethics. I don't know how that happened. But he started saying, well, I happen to be kind of a live and let live guy. I think I have my truth, and you can have your truth, and whatever your truth is for you, you go for it. And I've got my truth for me, and I just think, well, I live and let live and be tolerant. And I said, I think I understand what you're saying. I said, now, I got a group of 4 buddies, and once a month we gather together, all 5 of us. We put $50 a piece in a kitty little pot. We buy a 100-gallon drum of sulfuric acid. There's a pool store that sells in bulk. And we drive out to Lake Paris. A guy's got a boat, and we go out and we dump the whole thing in the lake. And now what we've done is ahead of time, we've taken estimate bets on how many fish are going to die and float to the surface, and whoever gets the closest to the fish that we kill wins the $250 kitty minus the cost of the sulfuric acid. It is a blast. Well, this is a true story. The blood veins and arteries. And I said, sir, I'm not an expert in body language, but I think that what you're feeling is that what my friends and I are doing is wrong. It occurs to me then that you're no relativist. You're only a relativist when it's convenient to your desires and lifestyle. You're probably a relativist in the area of sex. But when it comes to the environment, all of a sudden, you're an absolutist. So, dude, don't tell me you're a relativist. You're only a relativist in areas that you don't care about. But the ones you care about, you're an absolutist. So take that for what it's worth. All right, now here are the 3 issues facing us. And then we're going to talk about the implications. Here's the first one. Is Christian teaching something we can know to be true, or do we merely believe that it's true? Is the central Christian teachings, are they things that you can know? Like there are things in American history that we can actually know. There are things in psychology that we can actually know. Things in geology or chemistry or mathematics that we can know. We don't have to believe them, we know them. Well, are the dictates of Christian theology, are some of those in the center? Can we know those are true? If we can't, or do we just merely have to believe them? That's a huge deal. Why? Because knowledge gives people the authority to speak and act in public. We give dentists the right to lecture anywhere on molars. I have a dentist, and I've let the gentleman put his hands on my teeth and in my mouth. And there's nothing weird about this. Okay, don't be looking at me like that. Now, my neighbor, I know, likes me more than a dentist. I may hang out with a guy, but he's not going to get within 100 feet of my mouth. I'm telling you that right now. So why do I let the dentist do it? Because he's got a set of just really deeply felt beliefs about molars. And he has some CDs and he listens to molar music. And it makes him just feel very, very warm about his dentistry. And you ask him, well, do you know anything about molars? No, but I feel working on them has changed my life. and I'm telling you, no. That's not why the sucker has authority. He's got authority because we think he knows something. So he has a right to act in public, namely pull a molar. And he has a right to tell us what's real because we attribute to him, rightly or wrongly, that he has a body of knowledge relative to what he's saying. If you want to cut Christianity off at the knees, and if you want to make people afraid to share their faith so that they're cowards and they don't have courage, just teach them the Bible and keep working on the Bible. And don't teach them anything about why we think it's true. Just make it all about the Bible and continue to make it about faith, which is just an act of, just a choice to believe. And I can guarantee you won't have people sharing their faith because they don't have any courage. And the reason they don't have courage is that what 1 Peter says, if you're being intimidated for your faith, then here's what you do. 1 Peter 3:15. First of all, make sure it's not about you. It's about the Lord Jesus. So set Christ aside as Lord in your heart. It's about him. And secondly, be prepared. That is, do your homework. Read. Learn. Be prepared to give an answer to anybody who asks you for a reason why you believe this stuff. So that means learn to know why you believe what you believe. You see, we're losing our kids, folks, and this is a statistical fact. It's not because we're not teaching them what to believe as a Christian, but we're not teaching them why to believe it. I mean, if a kid says to me, why should I believe the Bible, as my kids did when they're young, they need answers to that question. Why not, we had Jews next door, why don't they believe the Bible? And I got a Muslim kid at school, they believe the Quran, why not that? Well, if you don't know the answer, Google it or find somebody in the church that can have it, or keep coming to conferences like this and get things to read and actually read them. Because we no longer present our religion as a body of knowledge that could stand alongside the other disciplines at the University of Virginia and hold its own in an intellectual discussion. Which doesn't mean you have to be able to engage in that. That's Dave Horner's job and my job. But at least you ought to know we're around. And you know what? It ought to matter to you that we're around because you ought to care about whether we have people that can make the case for what we believe so our kids have some heroes to look up to that are able to give a reason why they believe what they believe. But we don't celebrate our intellectual heroes because we don't know who they are and we don't value what they're doing because we have reduced Christianity down to a faith religion. And if by faith that means a choice to believe something or a Bible-only religion. I mean, it drives me nuts when people are overcommitted to the Bible. And by that I mean not that it's the inerrant word of God. It is, and all the rest of it. By overcommitted I mean it's the only place you can find truth. Well, it doesn't have to tell me how to get to Chicago. And did you know that there are reasons for God's existence and the resurrection of Jesus and the soul's reality and life after death that don't depend on the Bible to make that case? So I'm starting to preach now, and I'm going to back off. All right, now, the next one is there knowledge outside the five senses and science? Can we know things outside the five senses and outside of the hard sciences? And then the final issue is there a non-physical, immaterial reality? Is there anything that exists that's not physical and that's immaterial? Well, I would say I do. I have a body, but I'm essentially a soul, and you can't see my thoughts or my soul. And I'd have to make a case for that. A friend of mine and I just submitted a 650-page manuscript to the second best academic publisher, Wiley Blackwell, in defense of the soul. We took 650 pages to lay out a case that the soul is real, and we didn't use any biblical passages. And so, but that's what we need to train our kids to do. All right. Now, so what this is about today is really the nature and limits of knowing. Is the nature of knowledge such that you can only get it through the methods of the empirical sciences? Is that the limits of knowledge? I say no. There's all kinds of ways of knowing truth and reality. And they're not just limited to the science and the senses. Any claim that it is self-refuting, because the claim itself won't be testable by your senses and science. So we know that there are things you can know outside the senses. So now, I want to try to say very briefly now a couple of solutions to this problem. But if you don't take anything else away from this, just remember that knowledge it's important that we learn that we can know the central teachings of Christianity are true, and we'll talk about that. The first thing is I want to talk about the first practical application of what I've told you, namely that we're in a struggle of worldviews about knowledge and immaterial reality. And the first one is that we have to do more worldview thinking. We need to think more in light of our worldview. Now, what am I talking about? You don't just think biblically. The Bible is the foundation, but you have to expand that and begin to think about reality in light of a broader Christian view of what's true and real. Does that make sense to you? Okay, now let's take homosexuality. How would a Christian think worldviewishly about that? Well, the first thing that they would do in this culture is not talk about it as sin. That's the first. It is sin, but that's not helpful to people who don't think there is such a thing. Okay, so here's the way to think worldviewishly. I want to start persuading people that this is not the way to go. This is not the way to go. So what I do is I focus on the biblical teaching about human flourishing. Because the Bible says that God's commands are for our good and our enrichment and our flourishing. So, would you agree that if you follow Scripture, as opposed to going an alternative route, you have a better chance of having a life that's going to be a flourishing life, and you'll be better off than if you didn't follow the scriptural teaching? That doesn't mean you won't get sick and die of cancer or anything like that, but generally speaking, these commandments are good for us. So what I do is I talk about human flourishing, and that is flourishing the way God made us to function. And so I was on a talk radio show. Why are you even a secular station? Why are you evangelicals so mad about homosexuality? And I said, well, I'm not mad about it. I just think it's wrong, and it's doing people a lot of damage. What do you mean by that? And I said, what if my neighbors every Saturday morning had a tradition in the neighborhood where they took their cars and drove it down to Newport Beach, and they drove it down in the ocean as far as it would go, 20 feet, 30 feet. And then if it went to sputtered out, they'd see who won and so on, and they'd get a haul and haul their cars out. Now, I said that's not going to work very well, because they're using a car in a way that's contrary to the way it was made to function best. In the short term, they're going to have a blast for 5 or 6 Saturdays. But after that, this thing's going to start rusting out, and they're going to find out it don't work no more. And they're going to have to find another car, because if you don't treat a car the way it was made to work best, you're going to pay for it. Now, what kind of neighbor would I be if I saw my neighbors doing that and thinking that this is a blast, but they're living for instant gratification, and in the long run, this is going to ruin their finances? If I never said something to them, you need to please stop doing that, because that's not conducive to having a well-working car over the long run. What kind of person would I be? That's not loving. That's cowardice. And I said, same with homosexuality. Paul doesn't say it's wrong because it violates a biblical teaching. He says it's wrong because it's not the way we were made by God to work. You read Romans 1, that's what he says. So I take a page on that and I extrapolate that to worldview thinking. And I'm not going to start by saying it's a sin. I'm going to start by where Paul does, and that is that homosexuality is violating the nature of the way humans work best. And you're not going to have a flourishing life in the long run if you live contrary to the way you were made to work. That ain't the way we were made to work. And I predict that over the long run, there'll be more suicides. There will be people that won't be able to keep relationships. And they are living in a way that's not the way God made them by nature to function. And as a result, they're going to end up with a life that will grieve God because they aren't obeying the way he said they should live and do it well. And that's why I think it's wrong. And then I would bring in the wrong notion after I've done that. So if you start with your kids who are living in a tolerant culture, everything should be tolerated, and you start with the view that this is wrong, it's not going to get through to them. Is that right? Is it right that it's wrong? Yeah. But what you're wanting to do is to get through to your kids. So you have to start with telling them why it's wrong. And that's wrong because it ain't the way we were made to work. And we want our friends and all of us to like our cars, to function the best they can, don't we? And that means they should function the way their nature is, according to the way they were designed to work. And that's the same thing as to why we're concerned about your friends that are toying with gay behavior, because this is going to lead to a road where they're going to ruin their lives. This is not the way they were made by God Almighty to work well. And then you bring the wrong, that's why it's wrong. It's not because God arbitrarily flipped a coin one day and said, should I make homosexuality right or wrong? Bam. Oh, tails. Okay, wrong. But he could have done the other. No, once he made us, the wrongness of it followed immediately because of the nature of what he'd made. Are you listening? Am I making any sense? I'm pouring my heart out to you. Are you following, or are you just in a drunken stupor out there? Okay. Well, okay. Just on the Spirit, of course. It is too early. Well, I'm not so sure about that. All right. Now, what we also need is worldview teaching and preaching. Our preaching has got to be more worldview sensitive. Our application of biblical teaching and sermons is applied almost entirely to our personal individual lives. How is this going to make you deal with your depression or make you a more vibrant employee at work? All of that's important. I need it as much as you do. But what we need to do is to look for things in a biblical text that have implications to the ideas that are being embraced in culture. And we need to speak to those. We need to make application of the text, not just to our personal lives, but to the issues our kids are facing and that we're all facing in the culture, and the ones that Sam talked about. Okay, so for example, what about politics? What do we do with that subject? Well, I've written a whole thing on this, and I'm not going to go any further on it except to say that one of the key texts in Scripture is Romans chapter 13. And it says that the primary function of government is to bear the sword and to punish wrongdoers. Okay. Now, if I'm going to just teach through that, then I might make a comment about, so then you want to be sure that you're living, you're paying your taxes, you're living above the law. But see, if I'm sensitive to worldview issues, and if I've hung around people and go to websites and every now and then have a conference and read a little bit about these things, then I will have learned the difference between a negative right and a positive right. And a negative right is a right to be protected from harm when I try to secure something for myself. So if health care is a negative right, the government has a job not to give it to me, but to protect me from discrimination when I'm trying to get health care for myself. So a negative right is a right to be protected from harm that's not fair and just. A positive right is a right to have something given to me or provided for me. And if I have a positive right to health care, the government has a duty before God to give health care to us, all right? Well, Romans 13 says that the function of government is to preserve negative rights. There's nothing in there about providing positive rights. Now, maybe other biblical texts say that. I'm just talking about how I would teach Romans 13, sensitive to the issues of our day. And I would make the distinction between positive and negative rights, because as a preacher, I've read stuff besides commentaries, and I'm learning to think a little bit more philosophically and in terms of ideas. We're all in process. But then I would bring that into applying the text to a particular issue about the function of government. And then I would say, well, this isn't the only thing that Scripture teaches, but surely what's emphasized here is the preservation of negative rights, not the provision of positive rights. Do you understand? So that would be a worldview preaching. You would apply a text to some issue that's going on in society that Christians are afraid to speak up about. I was just talking to Bill over here, who's a professor at UVA, and I found him just kind of disgustingly confused. But after a while, that was a joke. After a while, he actually made some sense, until his wife interrupted him. But that's another issue. But he was talking about the fact that in his classes and another prof that was there, they have debates and discussions, and Christians are afraid to speak up. They won't speak up for their views. They're afraid to. Why? Well, they bought the line that they should be tolerant, and they want to appear tolerant. The other reason is they don't know what they're talking about. They've never been trained how to defend their faith, so they don't want to say something if they're going to get questioned about it, because they're afraid. They don't know what to believe. Well, that's why preaching regularly needs to be teaching people in the congregation over months and years to gradually understand how to speak from a Christian worldview into the issues of our day. And it produces courage without defensiveness and anger, so that we can simply stand because we know why we believe what we believe, and be firm about it without being little and defensive. Okay, we need to engage in more worldview thinking and teaching. I've got 15 minutes, so let me just say something about what is truth. Truth is a matching or a correspondence between a thought or a belief and reality. So if you have the thought that 2 plus 2 is 4 in base 10, and 2 plus 2 is 4, then the thought corresponds to reality, and it is true. So truth is when things are the way I think them or believe them to be. Now, it's not my thinking something to be a certain way that makes it true. It's reality. It's reality. You can think grass is purple all you want. That doesn't make it true. What makes it true is the color of grass. So if grass is actually green, and I have the thought in my mind, was born blind, and I'm in a community of people that are all blind. Nobody's ever seen anything. But a thought occurs to me, grass is green, as I'm walking with my cane across the concrete main street. And I'm thinking, well, that was a weird thought. I've never had it. Where did that come from? I don't have any idea. Well, the thought is true, whether I have any idea about whether it's true or not, and no way to prove it one way or the other, because it matches reality. If assuming the grass is actually green, is that thought true or not? The answer is yes, because it matches reality, and that's the biblical. The Bible doesn't teach a view of truth, but it assumes one. A false prophet is someone whose what he thinks and says doesn't match reality. Thy word is truth means that when rightly interpreted, everything the Bible asserts to be true matches reality. Doesn't mean all the truth that's there is in the Bible. There's a lot of truths outside the Bible, but whatever is rightly asserted in the Bible matches reality. When Jesus says, I am the truth, he didn't mean he himself was truth. I don't even know what that would mean. I think what he meant to say was that I'm either the source of all truth as creator, I'm the source of truth, or that I am the real Messiah as opposed to imposters. That I am the true Messiah that was prophesied in the Old Testament as opposed to imposters. So that truth is matching reality. It's when a statement, so if a kid says to you, well, what's truth? And you just say, well, truth is when you have a thought or a belief or you make some statement about reality, and reality matches, is the way that statement says it is. There's a match, okay? And false if there's no such match. So that's true and false. And that's a simple way of putting it. Now, what's knowledge? What is knowledge? There are 3 kinds of knowledge. You guys out there? Okay. Do you like me? Do you guys like me? Is there any? Jeez. I was just loosening us up a little bit, that's all. Okay. All right. Now, the first kind of knowledge is called knowledge by direct awareness. Knowledge by direct awareness. In this case, to know something is to simply be directly aware of it. So a little baby that's born, there's an apple in front of him, and the little kid looks at the surface of that apple, and they're aware of the color red. They don't know that it is red, and they can't see it as red. They can't to see it as red is to have a concept of what it is to be red and judge that the apple matches that concept. Do you make sense? So suppose that now I'm an adult, I could see that apple as Uncle Harry's favorite fruit because I know it is. And what that means is I have a concept of what it is to be an uncle and of who Harry is, what it means for something to be a favorite fruit. And so I have the concept in my mind of Uncle Harry's having a favorite fruit, and I know that this apple satisfies that concept, so I can see the apple as Uncle Harry's favorite fruit. But I can't do that until I have concepts that I can think with. And then I can see that it is Uncle Harry's favorite fruit, which is to accept the entire assertion that is Uncle Harry's favorite fruit and judge that it's true, that it corresponds to reality. But you start not with concepts or thinking, you start with experience. And the little child hasn't got a clue about the concept of red or judging something to be true, but he sure is aware of the apple. Are you there? So sometimes we know things by just being directly aware of them. I have been aware of demons. I've had the privilege of casting a demon out of a young girl that was a believer, and she had become demonized. And about 8 of us prayed over her. Her dad was a psychiatrist, and her mom a therapist, and they had tried all kinds of medication and therapy, and nothing worked. And we sensed the presence of darkness in her, and we prayed over her about 25 minutes, and we could sense the demon leave, or the demons. There was more than one. And she was instantly healed of her this crazy behavior. And I checked in with them 3 weeks later and then 4 years later. And her daughter never relapsed, and she was a leader of a Christian group in college and on fire for Jesus. And I have been aware of demons 100 feet away in a gymnasium that is knowledge by acquaintance. I have 3 angels that are standing around me right now. And my knowledge of that would pass in a court of law. I've written a book called Miracles on Miracles, and I tell how I know that these angels are around me. But there were 5 different people who didn't know each other in 5 parts of the country that all were aware of them and saw them. And saw how many there were, where they were positioned, their relative sizes. There's a tall one behind me and 2 short ones on either side. And that they weren't floating, they were all standing. And these 5 different people didn't know each other, and they came up to me and said the same thing. It was crazy. The point is that they were able to be aware of an unseen reality. Sometimes you can actually be aware of God's presence in worship, or if you're on your knees praying, something shows up. Now, God is omnipresent in his being, but he's not omnipresent in his manifest presence. He manifests his presence wherever he chooses, but sometimes he is moved to do so in response to our heartfelt cries and hunger for him. And I hope you've had experiences where there's a worship song that comes on, or you're on your knees crying out, and you sense one of God's attributes. You sense the presence of, let's say, holiness, or there's some big fella in here. This guy seems unmovable, and then his love and his kindness, or some other attribute that he's listening. And it happens in congregational worship to me. And those aren't just subjective. Those are real awarenesses of a being outside you. So knowledge by acquaintance goes beyond the 5 senses. You can be aware of your own feelings by just paying attention to them, but you can't see an emotion. But can you be, if you stop and you're angry at somebody, and if you stop and assess what you're feeling inside, can you be aware of the anger? That's just acquaintance. You're just aware of it. Okay, so you start there. The second kind of knowledge is called propositional knowledge. Propositional knowledge, and that's a true belief based on adequate grounds. A true belief based on adequate grounds. Now, suppose that we had a fellow that lived in Newport Beach, and he was homeless, and he was just drunk 24/7. And he lived around the men's room at Newport Beach, and he formed the habit of believing everything in the second stall in the Newport Beach men's room. His motto was, if the second stall says it, I believe it, that settles it. So he goes in there one day, and written on the stall was George Washington as first president of the United States. He has never heard of what a president is. He doesn't know what a president is. And he certainly has not heard of George Washington. But doggone it, it's on the stall, and he believes it. All right, now compare him to a credible historian who's sifted through newspaper articles in those days and letters that families wrote to one another in congressional records. And he believes that George Washington was first president of the United States. Okay, our two guys have two things in common. The first thing they have in common is they have the same belief. They both believe Washington was first president. Do you get that? The second thing they have in common is they both have a true belief. Their belief is true. They both have the truth. They have a true belief. But one guy has knowledge where the other guy doesn't. He's just lucky. And the difference is that the guy who has knowledge has a reason, has an adequate basis for why he believes that this is true. So when you furnish people with reasons, you transfer their true beliefs or what they believe into knowing it's true. So that kind of knowledge is a true belief that's based on having good reasons. Now, I want you to notice that you can know something without being completely certain about it, rationally. So the point is that you could know something. To know something is to have a true belief that's based on good, adequate grounds. And there's an intuitive sense. I can't get into how we know what that is, but it's just, I've got good, solid grounds for knowing this. So that God exists. I know God exists because I have good grounds for that true belief. I know the Bible is the Word of God because of the prophecy and archaeology and the effect it has on me and others around the world when they read it. So anyway, that's the point. But you can know something and still admit that you might be wrong. I know God exists, but I admit I might be wrong, but I don't have any good reason to think I am wrong. And so you can't just say to me, well, you might be wrong, mightn't you? Yeah, but that ain't going to chase my knowledge away. You got to do better than that. You got to give me a reason for thinking I am wrong. You can't just say, well, couldn't you be wrong? You know, I could be wrong that the universe is more than 5 seconds old, but we are all born 5 seconds ago with memories. I might be wrong about thinking the universe is older than 5 seconds. But the fact that I might be wrong is not going to keep me from claiming that I know the darn thing's been around longer than 5 seconds. You got to do better than possibility. So you can know something when you still have doubts about it, questions that aren't answered, and admit that you might be mistaken, but you have good enough grounds for the belief to know it's true because it's based on good grounds. Now, I want to contrast rational certainty, which means that you have so much evidence that it's not even possible you're mistaken. And about the only thing that I know that way is my own existence, and maybe 2 and 2 is 4, and a couple of laws of logic. But I don't know God exists with rational certainty. It's impossible I'm mistaken rationally. No, it's possible. But now psychological certainty is a different thing, and that's an absence of doubt. Now I'm at a point in life where I have psychological certainty. I don't pray our Father who probably art in heaven. I think whether you have spiritual and psychological certainty is either a function of a question that you've never found an answer to, or emotional issues where you have trouble attaching to God because of your family of origin. And I think good counseling and dealing with why you can't connect with people. Because a lot of times you feel the absence of God, and because you don't feel His presence very much, you just conclude, well, maybe He's not there after all. And I think emotional doubt needs to be addressed by your psychological life and spiritual life, not intellectually. All right, now, I'm almost out of time. You can also know something without knowing how you know it. Now, a lot of times it's important to know how you know something. But if you always had to know how you knew something before you could know it, that would lead to an infinite regress. Because any answer you gave to that, you'd have to know how you knew that one. And then if you gave that answer, you'd have to know how that one, and it's turtles all the way down, as they say. And so there are some things we just know without knowing how we know it. For example, I've had God speak to me, and I knew it was God, but I did not know how I knew it, but I just did. Now that's legitimate. Now you don't want to abuse that, because by now I know how to recognize God's voice because I've heard it enough that I can discern fairly well, not like 100% by any means, that felt like the Lord's saying something to me, and this was more like me talking to myself. Now we do have, thank God, have the scriptures that nothing that God says that's my standard of violation. But outside of that, I can know that God spoke to me without knowing how I know. You don't have to always know how you know something. Sometimes you just intuitively know. You understand what I mean? Your kids in trouble. You don't know how you know it, but you just intuitively sense something's not right here. And that's knowledge, even if you don't know how you know. And then the last kind of knowledge is know-how or practical skill. And that's the ability to do something well. And, some people have know-how on how to fix a car. The Bible gives us all kinds of know-how knowledge about practical application, about what forgiveness is and how to learn to forgive, how to pray the right way. And so the Bible is filled with that. So in conclusion, we have to learn what truth is just simply in three kinds of knowledge. And knowledge by direct experience, Christianity does give that. Propositional knowledge, which is a true belief based on good reasons for it. And you can have that even if you're not 100% sure you're right and you still have questions. It doesn't mean you don't know it. And then there's know-how or skill, and that's the ability to do something well and practically. And so we got to restore the idea that Christianity is a source of knowledge just as much as any other field of human life. And thank you.